Let's start with the land acknowledgement, please. So Toronto occupies a place that is home to Indigenous peoples for over 15,000 years. The Huron-Wendat, the Petun First Nations, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the New Credit River. The territory we're on consists of ceded land covered under Toronto Treaty 13 of the Upper Canada Land Surrenders and the Williams Treaties, as well as unceded land that continues to be contested. The territory is subject to the Dishwick-Lunspoon-Wampum Treaty between the Anishinaabe, the Mississaugas, and the Haudenosaunee that bound them to share and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples and settlers from all over the globe have been welcomed into this treaty in the spirit of friendship and respect. Toronto is now home for many First Nations, Inuit and Métis people, and that, only in part, must continue to drive our commitment and work to address and end systemic and institutional violence, and it requires us to center the narratives of Indigenous peoples in our collective decision-making towards social justice and equity. It's also a reminder that we're all accountable for those relationships and for being committed to continually acting in support of and in solidarity with communities seeking freedom and reparative justice. While reading and reflecting on a land acknowledgement is an important step, it may be helpful to use these moments as what we would call invitations to inquiry. For ourselves as individuals and as communities, this term was coined by Kai Butterfield, a PhD candidate at Boise, who was previously engaged with the Black Experience Project at the University of Waterloo. Her work acknowledges and reminds us that while we each have different relationships to the land we live on, depending on our ancestry and where we sit in relationship to struggles for justice occurring here, we are also encouraged to use moments like this, like a land acknowledgement, to reflect as invitations, to identify our own path to inquiry, our own path to learning more beyond a land acknowledgement. So it's part of both our individual and collective responsibility for each of us, for all of us, to invite ourselves to inquire, as we're all doing here tonight, to educate ourselves, to reflect on our position, our history, our responsibility, and to talk to others in our communities about how we can work together to take meaningful action. Thank you. It is my pleasure to invite you, to welcome you to GRADTalks. I'm glad you're here. I know there's always a million other places you can be as grad students and postdocs, and that it's really nice outside and you could also be on the patio. But instead you're here, lots of food and drink, and these two wonderful panelists to talk to us tonight. And before I introduce our interim vice provost and dean, I just want to thank all our staff that put this together. Simone Cote, Leslie Mutic, Shirley Lee at the back, Andy Lee, and Raquel Thompson, who's not here, who all work to do this. And I think, yes. And I think it was Leslie said her 21st GRADTalks. Woo! So she's been to more than any of us. So thank you. It is always a pleasure to do this and a pleasure to see you here. So it is also my pleasure to introduce our interim vice provost and dean, Dr. Caro Comardas, who is going to give us a very official welcome, and then we'll get started.
Thank you, Dr. Walton. And sorry, my phone's been ringing off the hook by my wife, and then robocall, I think, is my son's was late to school again this morning, and I get a robocall every day. My son, grade 9, he's struggling. But yeah, very exciting to have our first GRADTalks for the academic year. So thanks for being here on the topic of navigating a career in the age of generative AI. And I have to say, generative AI, obviously a big game changer for us, right? Disruptive is the word you could use. I was reflecting back on my life and my career and things that were disruptive. In high school, the big disruptive technology was spreadsheets for me, okay? Lotus 1-2-3 came out, and that was going to change the world. Wow, look at the things you can do with a spreadsheet, right? So that was a big thing then. But in grad school, I remember, sitting there with my friend and came across this software that had just been released called Mosaic, right? I don't know if you know Mosaic. It was the first web browser. So up until then, there was no web, right? There was no World Wide Web. There was Gopher, a text thing where you would use sometimes to go get information, but it was just text-based. So you could download images and look at them after you download them. But Mosaic put it all in one place, and you could see pictures on this web, and it was like, wow, this is cool. This is going to change everything, right? So that was a big game changer for me, right? But Gen AI, wow, right? I thought that was disruptive, right? So this is a big deal, and So thanks to the panelists for being here. It's an important topic. It has, as we all know, it has a lot of promise. It really can allow us as humans to focus on what's important and have the AI do the grunt work and collect information and synthesize it for us and summarize it and so forth. Big caveat is if it does it well, if it does it properly, if it's unbiased, as long as we don't over rely on it and do everything based on what AI gives us, right? That's the big fear, right? That it homogenizes our thought, human creativity is gone, right? And AI learns from what AI generated. Can you imagine that, right? Sorry?
I'm looking to move to another planet.
Another planet, yeah. So ironically, the person who's going to help us move to another planet is behind AI, right? Elon and his spaceships to go to Mars, right? So yeah, yeah. So it's scary, right? It is scary, and what does the future hold? It's both exciting and scary. So it's a very timely topic, and I'm glad we're having this. So thanks, Andy, for putting this together. Just a few things here. Again, thank you, Andre Fortier, the Director of Policy and Research at the DAIS, and Philip Mai, Co-Director of the Social Media Lab in the Rogers School of Management, for being here. So please join me in welcoming them. And just reminding you that this event is eligible for credit towards your Future Smart Passport. So make sure you get that credit. If you have any questions, if you're like, what is this Future Smart Passport thing, right? Please speak to Leslie. Leslie Newton, put up your hand so she knows, right? In the back there. She'll explain it all and make sure you're on board for that. And just letting you know in terms of the format, we're going to have the panel discussion, and we'll be open to Q&A from the audience, right? And then there is a networking reception with more food. So please stick around, network, get to know each other. I think networking is very important. As a postdoc, as a grad student, I've been through all that, and I really, the connections I made in meeting people during that stage of my career has been very helpful. So I'm just going to pass the mic back to Dr. Walton, who will moderate the panel. Thank you for being here. I hope you enjoy the evening. I do have to leave. This is what the phone calls are about. Take my son to a hockey game. I think plans are changing as we speak, because we have 2 kids in 2 hockey games that are close in time, and 1 car. So we're going to figure that out. Okay, so I do have to rush soon. So sorry I couldn't be here.
Thanks.
And I do have a test. So
Yes, he does. He has a test. Thank you, Carl. And let me introduce our 2 panelists before we jump into conversation. First, I'll introduce Andre Cote, who is the Director of Policy and Research at the DAIS, which is a think tank at TMU, and he's going to talk about the DAIS. So if you don't know what that is, he'll tell you more about it. Andre has worked in a variety of roles at the intersections of policy, higher education, and tech. And I had the pleasure of working with him in some of those. He is a mission-driven consultant, and I've seen that, offering strategic advice, research, and other services to a wide range of clients. As Senior Advisor to Ontario's Deputy Premier and Minister of Advanced Education and Skills Development, and working with Digital Government Services. He's also been the Chief Operating and Strategy Officer with Next Canada, which is a national not-for-profit incubator for entrepreneurs and startups. He has worked to develop, I remember this, the DIVE, the Student Age Digital Case Learning Model with the TMU's Leadership Lab and other partners. And he's also been on the board of the directors, he's a director on the board of eCampus Ontario. Andre graduated from the Monk School's Masters of Public Policy program and at Queen's, and he grew up in Ottawa, and we're really fortunate to have him here. Philip Mai is the co-director and senior researcher at the Social Media Lab, which again is at the Ted Rogers School of Management. He's a co-founder of the International Conference on Social Media and Society, #SM Society. And his work at the Social Media Lab, which is very cool and you should check it out, and he's going to talk more about it as well. Philip works on technology policy, data-related issues, knowledge mobilization, information diffusion, business and research partnerships, and the practical application of all those social media analytics. His research interests are mainly in digital political transparency, dis- and misinformation campaigns, online toxicity, conspiracy theories, and extremism. His research and commentaries have been featured all over, just Google him, in national and international media outlets, including Bloomberg Business Week, CBC The National, Globe and Mail, The Conversation, etc. His broad goal, and I think we're very glad he's here to do this tonight, is to connect people, knowledge, and ideas. So before we jump into the questions, I'm just going to ask Andre and then Philip to talk a little more about their current roles at the DAIS and at Social Media Lab, what they do and the work that they're working on. So Andre, please.
Sure, thanks Nancy. So first off, a real pleasure to be here with you and share whatever wisdom we have and talk a little bit about our work and network after. Happy to chat after, of course. So I'm with the DAIS. The DAIS is a TMU-based think tank, and so we're focused on making public policy change and helping to develop leaders. Our three big areas of focus are innovation and technology policy, education and skills policy, and democracy and trust. And so we try and do work that sort of intersects across those thematic areas. And we do typical think tanky stuff like put out policy research reports and submissions to government. We also have a DAIS learning arm where we offer micro-credentials, fellowships, other things around supporting policy change making. And then we do convening and community building types of things. So we'll put on conferences, events, et cetera, et cetera. And I guess in terms of my role, so I'm the director of policy and research. So I kind of oversee the policy research arm of things. And I also run one of our micro-credential programs, which is on secure and responsible tech policy. So it's a program geared to professionals in government, in industry, in civil society, who are trying to grapple with a lot of these big policy challenges around regulating AI, social media, but also aspects around the digital economy, around telecommunications, cybersecurity. So we offer training programs on that front. And I could go on, maybe I'll leave it there and we can continue the conversation.
Hi everybody, thank you for coming this evening. Hi folks. There we go. Sorry about that. Again, my name is Philip Mai. I am the co-director of the Social Media Lab. For those of you who don't know the lab, this is our 10th year here at TMU. We started the lab at Dalhousie. And we moved it here about 10 years ago. The lab itself is basically a research lab that looks at how social media impact our society, how it's changing the way we live and connect to each other. Over the years, we've gotten into a lot of different line of research that connect social media to things that affect our lives. Things like, at the beginning, we look at things like how social media affect and changing education. And then as people got more used to social media, it wove itself into every other part of our lives. So we got into things like how social media is used for advertising, and then more recently, in the last 5 years, we've been focusing mostly on misinformation and disinformation online, because again, that's become a thing that people are using social media for. And the other thing that we do at the lab is that we develop software for other researchers around the world to get data from social media to do their own studies. Because in the early days when we first started the lab, a lot of people came to us and says, hey, how do you guys get the data to do your study? And so we inadvertently got into the business of making software. So now we have students and professors and researchers from around the world, about 10,000 every year, that uses our software to get the data they need for their own study. So that's a little bit what we do at the lab.
Thanks, Philip. Okay, let's jump into it. We have grad students and postdocs here from across various programs and disciplines. And so the first question is really kind of a big one. And Philip, I'll ask you first. How do you foresee generative AI transforming traditional job roles in various industries over the next decade or so? Well, prediction is hard. How do you see that happening over the next 10 years or so?
I think that AI will change the way we work, but not necessarily replace all the jobs. Because that what we've been hearing over the last year and a half is all this fear mongering about how it's going to replace all the jobs. But when you look at many of the early studies that was based on, they were looking at the different tasks that are involved in all the jobs, and they say, oh, which of those tasks that you do in your job could be done by AI? But that's really the wrong question to ask. Because one thing that you have to look at is, just because AI can do it, but can do it cheaper. And also the cost of implementing the AI system, right, is going to be expensive. So more recent studies have shown that it's probably going to replace about 5–10% of the current jobs that we see. But many of the jobs that we have now will be augmented by AI, where you will be able to use it to speed up the work that you do, produce better results. And I think that's where things are going, is that a lot of this fear, I think, is a little bit unfounded. It reminds me of what happened when social media first came along, where they said that it's going to bring world peace, and then people can connect everything. And then at the same time, it didn't pan out that way, some of the fear mongering around it. So like I said, I'm excited about it, but I'm also anxious about it. I'm sure like most of you.
Andre, jump in.
Sure. So I'm going to cheat a little bit because we were talking about this before. So we're actually putting on a study about this very subject later this fall. It happens to be one of these task-based studies, but I hear your points there. And so I'll maybe give kind of like the high-level Coles notes, and I'm the policy director with a team full of great economists who do all the kind of real work. So where I get things wrong, I'll defer to them basically in terms of the complex sort of economics work. But the crux of it is the study looks at the 500 plus occupations across the Canadian economy. So the national occupational classifications, which are set out by the federal government, and we use this methodology from the United States. That allows us to basically look at two things across those occupations through this kind of task-based model. It looks at first the likelihood that an occupation will be exposed to AI, and the second is what's called the complementarity. So the likelihood that an occupation will either the tasks associated with an occupation will be augmented by AI, they'll be assisted, or more likely to be automated. And so the broad strokes findings are that about a quarter of the occupations in the Canadian economy, about a quarter of the jobs are in occupations in the Canadian economy that are in the highly exposed but highly complemented category, which means highly exposed to AI, but more likely to be assisted by AI. And so you look at those types of occupations, they tend to be things like judges and lawyers, surgeons and doctors, post-secondary administrators actually happens to be in that category. And I think when you look at the broad strokes, the characteristics of those jobs, they tend to be in highly sort of cognitive type roles, often with non-routinizable tasks, if that makes any sense. So often, sort of leadership type functions. In the case of a surgeon, sort of connecting a high level of skill with a very specific type of intervention with a patient, for example. So these occupations tend to have much higher levels of education. So something like 98% of the jobs in this category will have post-secondary or above. And they also tend to be paid significantly more than other occupations. And then the second category we look more closely at are the highly exposed but lower complementarity. And those are more, call them sort of white collar type jobs, cognitive type jobs, but more routinizable. And so think things more like financial analysts, like telemarketers, that whole sort of category, a lot of back office types of jobs. And so, the other thing we did in the study was look at job postings, millions and millions of job postings over the last 6 years to see what trends we could see about how what employers are seeking in terms of hiring for these roles, but also the skills they're asking for associated with those roles. So we were able to connect those occupations to the sets of skills that are in demand, which we're coming back to in a minute. And we're also able to sort of see some trends in terms of, how employers have been seeking out these roles in the past few years, which has been a very noisy period with COVID and everything like that. And so I think just kind of in sum, like I would say, firstly, a key point is this study is not predictive for a forecast. This study is, I would call it directional. So we're not saying these jobs will be automated, or it'll be very complex, and we'll have to see where it goes. We'll have to track it over time. So some water in the wine on that front. And I think the second point is one that Philip made, I think, was that we've also done work looking at rates of AI adoption across the Canadian economy, and it's I would call it low and slow, basically. So as of 2021, based on StatsCan data. In a report we put out recently, it was south of 4% of Canadian firms had reported having adopted AI, more for larger firms, but obviously there's a kind of preponderance of small and medium companies. And more recently, as of 23, it was up to, I think, about 7%. So I think, a key point is there's a lot of hype about this right now. It's real, and it'll change jobs and maybe automate some away over time. But it's also not, I think, to Phil's point, not a cause for panic. This is going to take a little bit longer than I think we're anticipating or we're hearing.
Can I just follow up with a quick question? That high level, the first level, you said surgeons, lawyers, judges, post-secondary administrators. You said one of the keys about those. One of the factors they share is that they're not routinizable, right? So and I'm thinking of, I was a surgical nurse in a past life, and I'm thinking of even the best surgeon doing the same heart valve replacement and coronary bypass. You come across things that are unique in every operation, and you have to make quick decisions, sometimes without enough context. Same maybe with a post-secondary administrator, but same with a judge or a lawyer. You're dealing with things that are there's some things that are similar, but the decision points are the key. So I'm not sure what my question is, and you may not have found that in research, but because that's, to me, a shared factor of a shared attribute of those roles, where do they see AI being highly complementary there for the other stuff, the non-critical decision points?
So I think in a lot of roles like that, AI can be a decision support tool. So you think, for example, about those types of roles, you are almost certainly not going to be automating like the core functions of a surgeon, but what you might be able to do is like AI might be able to read a whole bunch of scans, provide them with some advice in looking at a scan on what it might be telling them, but it's not going to make the decision for them, likely. I think those types of things. One of them that we profile in the paper is a lawyer, just because it's a pretty sort of commonly understood type of role. And so lawyers obviously have to read and synthesize like very large amounts of texts. Lawyers have to prepare contracts that can be like very almost templated, right? Those are certain tasks that they can be assisted with through these technologies. But lawyers also have to line up their clients. Lawyers have to present evidence in a court of law. Lawyers have to do mediations. Lawyers have to do all of these types of things that really are not replaceable. So I mean, I think or hope that kind of gets at your question.
I just want to add that one of the things that we are concerned about is tasks that requires you to synthesize things. The humans are not going to be able to keep up with the ability of the AI to synthesize things. So jobs where you're setting up the experiment and then collecting that first initial set of data, those jobs are not going to be affected, because the AI is not able to do that yet. But once the data is collected, there's a secondary task that currently a lot of people are doing is now that the data is in the spreadsheet, somebody has to synthesize and figure out what does all this mean. That's where we're going to see a lot of impact, simply because the AI will be able to make connections that we might not as humans be able to at the same level or the same efficiency. So as a result, you will see that these carve-outs in these jobs where more of your job is going to be verifying and validating what the output from the AI is going to be. Because again, one of the things that we're going to see is that the rate at which knowledge can be produced will increase. But we would then need to have new jobs and new roles to verify that, right? So that's where I see some of the shifts are going, is that the people have new skill set where they'll have to say, okay, the company or the department is able to produce a lot more content that now needs to be verified before it gets shipped out and put on with a label from that company. Because otherwise, they're going to ship something that's going to be recurrent or defective.
Okay, interesting. So on to sort of shift from this to thinking about grad students and postdocs here, what kinds of skills or competencies do you think would be valuable or most valuable for our grad students, for our postdocs to develop or focus on or think about or learn in order to thrive alongside generative AI technologies? And Andre, you want to start?
Sure. So we looked at this as well in the study, right? And so I know I've got it way easier than you thought. But so we looked at this in the study as well. And so what we did was we worked with this this provider that basically pulled for us, I think it was 10 million plus job postings over a 6-year span. And so with that vast amount of data, we were able to sort of synthesize it down and tease out trends. And so we would basically connect job postings to these specific occupations, and obviously in large numbers, and then identify like what are the most common unique skills being asked for of the occupations in the more likely to be assisted bucket versus the more likely to be automated bucket. And so, I mean, the list, I pasted it here. But so it's things like planning, coaching, patient care, leadership, critical thinking, sales, often kind of underappreciated, but very interpersonal skill, problem solving, budgeting, operations management. So those types of functions. And then if you sort of contrast that with the ones amongst the occupations in the more likely to be automated bucket, it was a lot of reasonably sort of technical, routinized things, as we said. So accounting, use of certain software like Microsoft Excel, data analysis, office administration, information filing. You kind of get the picture, right? But so I think the big takeaway I would have from this is not that those other skills are not good skills to have, right? Firstly, they will be valuable now, and they will likely be valuable into the future. I think what's notable about the bundle of skills associated with the more likely to be assisted occupations is, they're what are often called the kind of soft or transferable skills, the types of things that you'll benefit from in various types of jobs that you'll be in, that will allow you more sort of adaptability. And so it's not to say that there isn't a lot of value in developing, a lot of the more specific sort of technical skills. It's just making sure you're kind of thinking about, your sort of well-rounded sort of collection of skills as you're heading out into the job market.
Oh, I'm going to go over because I see you have some notes, and then I have some comments. Go.
Sure. To me, one of the things that everyone in this room needs to pick up on is project management skills. The days of where you are assigned one specific task to do something as part of your job, and that's all you do, and then you go home after 5, those days are going to be gone, if they're not already gone. You're going to be asked to do multiple things and wear multiple hats in your job and know things from other departments to make the job, whatever the task is, successful. So one of the skills is, like I said, project management, but also problem solving, so that you can figure out how to deliver on what it is that the task is being asked of you. Because otherwise what happens, like for example, at our lab, our people, they have an assigned project that they work on, but we involve them in other aspect that is not specifically tied to their specific title, simply because we know that when they leave our lab, they will be thrown in a situation where they won't have the resources and the things that's necessary, because they might not have a big team around them, but they still have to do that job. So for example, our people know how to set up a website. Why? Because if we're launching a new project, right, you need a way to get that information out. They got trained on how to figure out, okay, now that you you got the money for this new project, but you need to have a digital home online to feature what it is that you're doing, right? In the old days, when we first started, we would have a dedicated web person, right? But now everybody in the lab has access to all of our website and web pages. And then if somebody needs to update something, we didn't have to wait for one person in the lab. It's like, oh, that person is out. The page is not going to be updated, right? For a week or two. Now everybody in the lab have that skill. So project management skills, and then learn to diversify your skill set. Know the core of what it is that you are a specialist in, but know all the peripheral things that is necessary to make your project successful. So that way, in a pinch, you can step in and move the project forward. So that's a skill.
Yeah, and I think, there's people in the audience here from the Yates School, and, I'm making eye contact and we're all very, because we're thinking about our programs in leadership, sessions we run on things like conflict and navigating conflict and how to take a solution-focused approach to a challenging conversation, all things that I think, speak to your points, as well as project management. So on that question, and given the skills and competencies you sort of talked about there, and how to kind of diversify yourself, understand your core, brand, but also be able to be flexible and nimble and kind of pivot and have these other kinds of skills. What are some, or how can our grad students and postdocs adapt their career planning strategies to account for everything you've talked about, the changing job landscapes, even though, we know where we are now, may not be where, it's not predictive, it's descriptive what you've talked about, but, everyone in this room is either a grad student or a postdoc, most of them, and thinking about not where they are today only, but also where am I going, right? What's the next step? And career planning and thinking ahead, doing things now to help your future self is important. So I saw people taking notes when you're talking about these skills and competencies. What are some things that grad students and postdocs could do in their career planning strategies to account for some of this? And I'll start with you, Philip.
For me, one of the most important things right now is learn more about how AI works, what their weaknesses are, what their strengths are. So this way, when you are assigned a job or a task, you know when to insert them into your work processes and when to alert your boss that actually we don't want to use it that way. Okay, so start with getting some of the basic. What are they? What can they do? What are their biases? What are their weaknesses? What can't they do? What they might be able to do in the future. By understanding that, as you go into the workforce, you will start to see more of these technology being brought into the workplace. And the salespeople are pretty good. They will tell your boss that this thing will solve everything. You're the one stuck implementing that. And you'll discover that actually it won't do any of those things that the salesperson who now got his commission and moved on, right? So by knowing what it can't do, you can actually be very effective because you'll be the person on the team that says, yes, we can do that with it, but actually we might not want to use that for this aspect of the job. So know your job enough so that you know that, okay, to get this project completed, these are the various components. Which of those components can be aided by AI? Which of those components will only be done by you rolling up your sleeves?
Andre.
Yeah, and I mean that's a funny one also because it's like totally not unique to AI, right? Like how many examples are there where people come in with the technology and say this will solve everything, and then lo and behold, the implementation's terrible, can't do all the things. But so I had the same one, which was just I don't you don't the expectation is not that you're an expert in these things, but you need to be aware of and familiarize yourself with the varieties of these tools. And I would say on the most basic level, it's like just test them out, experiment with them. I found it interesting just trying different ones. So ChatGPT is probably like the most common, but I've been playing around with Claude lately, like the Anthropic one, and there's Gemini, there's Perplexity. And they do similar things, but they actually produce kind of Philip's point, like they'll produce like different types of outputs, and then it sort of makes you think like, what's happening behind the curtain slightly differently with this tool versus with that tool. And so I think that would be number one. Just maintain your familiarity with these things because you will be confronted with them, and we will see more of them. I think a second one is just more around sort of career planning. To just broadly have an adaptable mindset as you're thinking about it. There are far fewer linear career paths these days, and I know if the tenured faculty track is still the goal, that could be one. But from what I understand, that's a harder. I certainly would be qualified, but it's a harder sort of nut to crack these days. And so in most cases, you'll be experiencing some change within your career, or you might even, have a core job and be doing some side hustles and some interesting things. So plan to be adaptable, and recognize that there are going to be some twists and turns as you go. And I think the third one is, whether for your sort of professional and career purposes, or just for your own sort of intellectual curiosity, think about where you can identify learning and skills development opportunities ongoing. And so maybe it's through like the TMU Chang School, but now there are just like a million opportunities out there. Like I've taken courses on Coursera, taken workshops, done a whole variety of things. And so just be thinking about how you're constantly thinking about, what are the next 3 things I want to learn or develop. Maybe set some short-term goals for yourself.
And both of you said learn about generative AI, right? And so the next question is kind of about that, but I want to kind of do a little shortcut to say, I think people feel, I don't know, maybe some anxiety about learning about AI, thinking, I think I'm a nutritionist. I don't know about AI, or I'm a nurse. I don't know about AI, or and also this anxiety that what I learned about AI today is going to be out of date by next week, because this is always evolving, and I'm going to learn something, and then someone's going to say, well, that's old news now. So how did you're both experts in this area. What are some ways that people can learn about AI? Like, is there a place you go? Is there something you'd recommend? I mean, yes, trying them out, various, how would you recommend people learn about AI and get some of that anxiety decreased, maybe?
I think like if you really want to get into this, there are now programs or courses that you can take, and some of them are, some of them will be like AI for non-technologists, right? Which would certainly be the camp that I would fall into, like teaching me just enough not to be dangerous, and going out and talking about this type of stuff. But I think, there's so much interest, there's so much profile around this issue these days that there are, if you want to learn about AI broadly, there are tons of resources out there. I think what's harder is this question of how will AI impact work? I think that there's really no, like we're doing this work again, a preliminary kind of directional sense, but there's really no crystal ball for knowing how this is going to unfold. And I think a lot of what we're hearing out there and then seeing in the news is heavily hyped these days. And so a lot of it has to be sort of taken with a grain of salt. So in terms of learning about AI as it will impact your career, I think that's a little trickier at this stage. But in terms of learning about the technology itself and what's different about Gen AI from other types, et cetera, I think there's plenty out there.
Bill and John.
Sure. Well, for me, we use AI as part of our work. For example, in the old days, when I capture a data set, let's say 10 million posts from Twitter or from Reddit, I would hire 10 undergraduate students and says, hi, I'm going to take a sample of 10,000 posts, and then they can read it and then classify it for me, right? Now, I don't do that anymore. I take the 10 million posts and I ask an LLM, what are these posts about? And it summarizes for me. So the way we hire and use staff now in the last 2.5 years have fundamentally changed, because I don't use staff in that particular way anymore. For example, our undergraduate student, because the AI can now literally read the 10 million posts and give me a summary. Hi, here are the 10 topics that they are all talking about. So that's just one example. But for me to keep up with what's happening in AI and how it's affecting society, there are groups all over the world right now that's been popping up over the last 5 years that's trying to address some of the concerns and some of the issues that are being brought about by AI. So for example, there's one institute, the AI Now Institute in New York, that I follow. They put out great reports and they keep up with some of the ethical and legal questions that these new technology are raising. there are industry groups that more, rah-rah supporting AI and so on that are set up by the Google and Meta of the world. They also provide one aspect of it. So I try to consume information from folks who are very critical of AI and how it might affect society, but also the people who are pushing it. Because I've learned from the past that in between them is the truth that we're probably going to experience. It's going to be somewhere a little bit of both, right? So I always try to keep up like what each side is saying to see what is the middle path here, where most of us will probably experience. Because each side have a vested interest in either pushing for more regulation and shut this whole thing down, and the other side is let's make money with this. And so it's going to be happening somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, I mean, probably this is what you just said, but I think we're past the point of like, stop funding it and shut this down, right? So it's somewhere in the middle. So learning about AI, there's lots of different ways you've talked about and how to sort of engage in it, whether you are somebody who's, already technologically really savvy or someone who's just wants to not be, as you said, not be dangerous. Is there anything else you'd recommend to grad students and postdocs for talking about or for thinking about and learning about how to stay really in touch with the skills and roles that'll be in demand going forward? I mean, you've talked a little bit about this, but anything else, I mean, without being predictive, but anything else that you think grad students and postdocs can really do to kind of stay on top of thinking about the skills, the competencies, the roles that'll be in demand?
I mean, I don't think I have anything like particularly novel to contribute on that one, but I mean, I think just to kind of sum up in a way, I mean, I think what this latest generation, what generative AI has the potential to do, I think, as Philip said, is tasks that involve like the synthesis of large amounts of information or data, right? So we can imagine that tasks associated, or tasks focused on doing those things are some of the types of things that could likely be, more so automated or changed, as this progresses. So keep that in mind. And I think the flip side of that is the types of skills that will likely remain in high demand are those sort of softer skills, those transferable skills, those leadership skills, those critical thinking skills. But ultimately, you want this, this sort of diversity of those things. I think the other key point is that, the research to date suggests like this is not happening overnight. This will actually be a reasonably gradual process. And I think previous waves of technology adoption have totally borne this out as well. And so this isn't something to be worried about for tomorrow, but it's probably something to be thinking about as you're, concluding your studies or you're sort of charting your next steps in your career.
This is something I tell all the postdocs that students that work at our lab. Whatever job that you're doing, understand how your end product is going to be used. Whatever it is that you're working on, make sure that your end product is somebody else's raw product. Okay? And what I mean by that is you have to understand beyond the task that's being asked of you. So whatever job that you get into, whatever new technology that you're going to be asked to use, you have to understand that once you're done with this, how is it going to be used? Who's going to be using it? By understanding that, you will make your product, whatever it is that you're putting out, the report, the data collection, or whatever, it's going to be better because you know that as soon as you're done with it, somebody will see value in it and will use it. But if you find that anything that you're producing sits on a shelf and people ignore it because they don't see value to it, or they have to do more processing of it to become useful to them, what you will find is that your job will become obsolete simply because eventually the person who's supposed to be using your product has decided they're going to use something else, right? So whenever you're giving a task, always understand what does your boss have to deliver and ship, right? Because that will make your job easier. So that's more of a general piece of advice, but that's something I've always beat into the people that work at the lab is, when I ask you to do something, don't just say when and what. Ask me, how am I going to use it? Who am I going to give it to? How do they normally consume this kind of content? So this way, because you could have chosen to set up the report in this format, or in this particular way, right? But without that extra information, you're just going to do something to get it done. But if it's done, but it's not being used, eventually nobody will ask you to do that anymore. So that's just more of a general advice.
I was gonna say that advice is really valuable, generative AI or not.
That's maybe an existential point about but what we're all doing here.
So the last question we have, I'm gonna ask it, but I'm gonna say that I think you've both answered it in a way that means it's actually a redundant question, which is we're gonna talk about, and you're welcome to talk about it, proactive steps that workers, grad students, postdocs, workers in general can take to future-proof their careers. And I actually think we've really not been talking about that. We've been talking about how to really think about generative AI in the context of the skills, the competencies, your core role, your ability to diversify. So is there anything, I'm going to put that question out there, is there anything workers can do to future-proof their careers in an era that's increasingly or iteratively influenced by generative AI? But I also, because that question I'm feeling is a bit redundant now, welcome you to just give any last sort of words of wisdom, and then we'll open it up for questions. And Philip, I'll start with you.
Whatever your interest is, be the expert. Because by being the expert and learning deeply that particular topic, you'll be able to tease out the nuance that the AI, which is a generalist, will not be able to tease out. Okay? So dive even deeper into whatever specialty that you are interested in. Because that's where the value is going to come from, is people will rely on you because you will be able to tell you not what is just happening on the surface, but additional information that people might not see just by looking at the thing. Okay? And the other thing is, don't try to be just interesting, try to be interested. So one of the things that I've learned over the years in the work that I do is that when you become an expert, you become interesting. But the more successful people are the people who are also interested. Get to know the people that you work with. Get to know what they need, how you can help, so that you're interested in them and the things that they are interested in. Because your success comes from their success. So everything that we do at the lab, everything that we create and make, we're doing it with a particular community or group of people in mind. So as a result, everything we put out, we already know who the receptor community is, right? So start thinking in that way when you do things. Who's going to use this? How are they going to use this? So this way, whatever you do is going to be of value to the people in your life, in your circle.
I mean, I guess my sort of closing thoughts, I would say we've spoken a lot about AI. I mean, I think like AI will be a consideration, but it should likely be a reasonably minimal consideration for you as you're thinking about your careers in whatever fields of study you're in. I mean, I think much more important is thinking about what you want to do after your time at TMU or your studies. Like, what type of job do you want to have? What type of career path do you want to pursue? Maybe thinking more broadly about like the availability of those types of roles. So it's not just an AI question. There are all sorts of things happening in the labor market that might make certain types of career trajectories like more feasible, more doable, and less. So I would just have that kind of broader lens on things. I think adaptability. There's some people who I know will be in certain fields of study and will have set personal goals for themselves, where they'll say, I've always wanted to be a X, and so that's what I'm pursuing. But I think increasingly, and I certainly know for me, I didn't really know where I wanted to go, and to a large extent, I moved around through my career to whatever kind of the next interesting opportunity was. I think to Phil's point, the next thing that I could be really interested in, passionate about, and that really I think contributed to they've all been successful, like Next Canada, but Next Canada was. Nancy and I spent a lot of time with the former CEO of Next Canada, who's a phenomenal guy. Just to say, I think adaptability and recognizing that you're going to move around throughout your career is going to be a very important one, and just be open to kind of the next interesting opportunity.
Great. Well, you've given us actually a lot to think about and a lot of advice, and I want to thank you. And let's have a big round of applause for our two. And I'm going to open it up for questions. Seth, and maybe when you ask your question, I'll hand you the mic and you can just say who you are before your question.
Hi, I'm Seth Dworkin. I am the academic lead for postdoctoral fellows, but I'm here because I'm just really interested in what you had to say. I'm really interested in bias, removing bias, removing systemic bias from things like hiring, promotion, graduate school admissions, policing, racial bias, gender bias, affinity bias. What role do you see AI having in helping us eradicate bias from things? And we're at a university, so we can use university admissions to competitive programs as an example, or getting our foot into industry, because everyone here will be probably leaving the university at some point for a great career. What role do you see AI in that, potentially, if at all?
Do you want me to take a stab at that one? Well, I think it's a really interesting question, because one of the big critiques of AI is this question of bias in a lot of what these LLMs are producing for us. And so efforts are obviously being made to refine these systems, address those biases. A big part of the challenge, though, is obviously they're trained on this vast amount of data, a lot of which is just sort of scraped off the internet. And so a lot of what they produce is going to reflect a lot of what exists out there in the world. So I think that's going to be an ongoing battle. But I think that, to your point, the flip side of that is we all have all sorts of human biases that are reflected in hiring processes, that are reflected in bail and sentencing decisions by judges, that are reflected in all sorts of things. So I don't really know the answer to that one, but you could see a world where AI could be supported if the right guardrails are put in place, if the right assessment for bias is undertaken, to be in the right circumstances to applied in use cases where human bias is actually a significant problem. I think, part of the problem we've been seeing is there are examples like the application of AI in facial recognition technology, which is a company out of the US called Clearview AI that was basically scraping faces off the internet, and then they were selling this product to all these law enforcement services, including a bunch in Canada, who almost kind of surreptitiously started using this. That's hugely problematic for a whole variety of reasons. So the question is, what are the right sets of guardrails, policies, and technology side screens and assessments that we have to do to have enough confidence that this can be assistive as opposed to just contributing further bias.
The question reminded me of a comment one of my law professor had when I first started law school. He said that just because we can do something doesn't mean we should. So we're at that stage with AI now, because the AI technology is developing very quickly, and a lot of people are literally, chewing a lot of chewing gum and throwing it on the wall to see what sticks. And we're in that phase right now. We're trying to figure out what this thing can do, and then on the policy side, we have to then step back and say, just because you can do that doesn't mean you should, because we do have other priorities in society that we want to encourage. So I think we're going through that process right now of trying to figure out what kind of guardrails we need to have, what kind of policy we need to put in place as this technology come along. So you'll see more efforts to try to smooth out and remove some of the biases. But I think this is not something that you do once. This is something that, sadly, we'll have to do continuously. Because remember, the data that's being fed in is constantly changing. So the algorithm that you see today and the output that you see today is going to change, right? So unfortunately, going forward, this is going to be part of our society where we constantly have to have basically a separate new department in your company, in the government, that will constantly have to audit the output to make sure that it's not violating things like, housing laws and discrimination law, employment law, and so on. So that's going to be a whole new industry right there. It's just people checking up on the AI to say, hi, once a year, are you spitting out result that's not violating some laws?
But I would just add, you brought up the medical example earlier, and that idea of a surgeon, for example, looking at the AI's advice on imaging, for example, and you could think about it as a decision support tool in many circumstances. Today, I was going through a stack of applicants for a role that we're hiring for. So I had like 30 candidates. Honestly, the level of diligence I was able to apply in going through those. So I don't yet have confidence that there is some kind of AI tool that could be assisting me in that decision making or sort of advising my decision making through that process, although there very well could be. But what I do know is the way I was going through those could certainly not be the most efficient way. Plus, I will also have my own inherent biases as I'm going through. So I think there's potential. We just need to be careful.
Thank you. Other questions? Yes.
Sure.
My name is Sharon Folksall. I'm coming from social work. So it's around, how do I say this? Not product, but humanity, compassion kind of way of doing things. I'm wondering if I did hear you both saying that with AI, to make sure that we have the knowledge moving ahead in our programs, that's one of the classes we should have. I think I'm thinking that through and wondering if that's something you did address or not address. And also, the next part of my thinking was around, because I know, Andre, you listed all the category judges and surgeons, but I don't know if I get it mixed up. And I don't want to use the word low income workers, but lower income workers. Where do they fit in all of this? If you know,
Yeah, sure. So I think so. Two questions there. Do you need to integrate AI education into the social work program?
and all the disciplinary program. Yeah.
My sense would be, it's the type of thing where if there was some supplementary extracurricular opportunities that could be made available to people, and then there's all sorts of things they could also find outside of the kind of TMU environment. So maybe it's one of those things where, you could point people towards certain types of resources, but I'm not sure you need to be, you need to rush to kind of hardwire things into curriculum or anything at this point. And then to other questions. So firstly, I didn't want to kind of drone on and on about this piece, but there's a whole segment of occupations where this model basically suggests that there is a lower likelihood that they will be exposed to artificial intelligence, and so that includes a lot of lower wage service occupations for sure, but also like tradespeople, for example. So there's a sort of a whole category of those types of occupations, and just by the nature of this technology, they just likely will not be significantly impacted. So we just kind of park that. I think the broad strokes is, at least for generative AI, it seems like it's more likely to impact more kind of white collar type professions. Does that answer the question?
Want to add in?
Yeah, this reminds me of what happens when Google search came along in the 90s. librarians had to set up supplementary programs in the library to teach people how to properly use Google search, and so on. So there was a whole cottage industry in the 90s where librarians were teaching people how to properly use Google search. So I don't necessarily think that we should be incorporating as AI learning and AI literacy necessarily as something that has to be woven into every single program, but there probably should be a supplemental type of things that are small little units that are introduced throughout the program at appropriate point. Because these are new technologies, there are drawbacks to using them, but there are also benefits to using them. And right now, if we leave people to figure this out on their own, the diffusion process is going to take longer. So we need to formalize that, but not necessarily it has to be included into everything that we do, because again, that's a huge waste of resource. But we can't ignore it either.
Thank you, Sharon, for the questions. Yes.
Hi, thanks for insightful discussion. I'm Sajjad, a postdoc researcher. So I have a question related to, navigating my research career. So most of the time, we researchers use Gen AI, to build the discussion, to generate the decision making through ChatGPT or through other, tools. But this is the reality that although in documentation, we all agree that these are permissible tools, like we can use this, but even supervisors, even professors, they wanna hide it. They wanna not reveal in front of the journals or editors that we don't use it. Even in the thesis, they want their students to mention very categorically that you did not use the AI tool. So my question is, like, building an idea from the AI or producing the idea from the AI and then owning that idea that, okay, I own this idea. Like how these things work in the detection of AI. Because I believe that, if we are using the AI for the shallow level, generation or shallow level usage, it can be detected very easily because one user who is using AI several times, they can easily detect that whether this content has been built through the AI tool. But when we tailor somehow the generated idea from the tools, then I believe AI itself, they cannot recognize and detect that whether this would be generated from the AI. Like how you see this credibility and how do you think that is this detectable or my thinking is wrong?
So I'm actually going to jump first, just to say that the Yates School guidelines, we do have graduate guidelines on the use of AI. And one of the key values or principles in there is transparency. Whether it's supervisors, faculty members, or students, graduate students, postdocs using AI at any part in any project, it's about transparency and declaring it and being explicit about it and having those discussions up front, which is, I think, some of what you said at the beginning about using it and not declaring it. We would discourage that. We would actually encourage open discussion of how AI is used in whatever it is, whether it's data analysis, whatever stage of the project you're using. There are also university-wide principles and guidelines on use of AI that were just published maybe a couple of months ago from the Vice Provost Academic. Again, one of the key principles in there is being explicit and transparent about it. So, and those are sometimes difficult discussions, right? Because, of course, as graduate students and postdocs, one of the goals is creating originality in your work, making novel contributions, filling gaps that exist, but being able to say this is my work. So that discussion up front about what is my work, I don't think it's an obvious thing that just because generative AI was used in some way, it isn't your work. But I think to sort of go higher level, the key is that there is some transparency about that and discussion. And what does it mean for novelty, originality, contributions, upfront and ongoing? But I'll see, do you want to add anything to that?
I think right now we're in a transition period where the norms as to what you should declare and how you should declare is still being worked out by everybody. I can still remember when programmable calculators became available in high school. And my math professor would not let us use it. They would stand in the front of the room. They would check to see whether which model of the Texas Instrument calculator do you have. And if it has a bit of memory where you can enter a formula, you have to leave it up front. You can't bring that particular calculator in. Now we don't care, right? We don't care about that. So we're in that phase right now where everybody's trying to figure out where is that line. Right now, some programs are saying you need to declare and be transparent about it. But once this technology becomes so pervasive and it's everywhere, the declaration and the transparency become performative. Because basically it's like, hi, I use it. Now what? Which part do you use it for? How detailed do you have to provide? Right? Because if you have a large project that take a year or two to do, and throughout that whole pipeline, you use it here, there, and everywhere. This becomes a whole dissertation to declare what you've used. So like I said, while we hear all these new policy going around, I think that eventually it's going to be a moot point due to the fact that right now, because it's in this transition period, and some of these policies that we have at this very school is contradictory. So depending on which hat you're wearing and which program you sit in, you might see something, you compare some of these policies. So like I said, follow them, but at the same time know that they're going to go away.
All policies, just.
Well, I mean, yeah, I totally agree with all that. I mean, like a few weeks ago, I gave this guest lecture in a master's in the policy program, and so I prepare this presentation. I sit down and I'm flipping through the syllabus, and like the first 6 pages of the syllabus were a big disclaimer about the use of. And I was kind of laughing because I hadn't prepared my presentation using AI, but I used it to sort of generate ideas that were spiced throughout. And so there's just this kind of irony, right? Like it's a tool, and so I agree. We're very much in this transitionary period, but we're not putting it back in the box, right? We just have to figure out how we're going to be able to deal with this, how we're going to use it. And I had one other thought, which evades me now. So I'll come back to it.
If it goes to you, who knew that a talk on AI would turn into talks about syllabi and policy?
Oh, sorry, I do have it. To me, the big problem currently is around sourcing, or call it provenance, right? That's to me the big challenge. Essentially, it's just pulling from this massive training data and providing you with this kind of very nicely written but sort of predictive response, and you have no idea where it's come from for the most part. And so I feel like that aspect is problematic. If you do a Google search, it'll direct you to a bunch of resources. You can decide if those are worthwhile, and then you can source them. And so that to me seems like a big gap in this realm right now.
Thanks for those answers. Really, lots to think about. Ketan.
Hi, my name is Ketan. I work in career and professional development for grad students and postdocs in the Faculty of Engineering and Architectural Science. So, Andre, my question to you was regarding the study you mentioned in the beginning, where there were predictions about which professions were going to be affected by AI. I was wondering if that report is publicly available or published somewhere.
So it is not yet. This was like the preview edition. It's actually out with some reviewers right now, and so I think likely it'd be like late next month that we would expect to publish. So you have the first in the world preview edition, yeah.
And my second question was to both of you is how much should people consider AI as they're deciding where to move in their career paths? Because as someone that works in career development, we often talk about things like your passion, how lucrative your career is. And as you were saying, things are evolving so fast. Should people be putting AI as a primary factor in determining how they should move forward with their career? Thank you.
I mean, I guess I can go. I will be curious once this piece comes out to almost turn that question around on you, because one of the things I've been thinking a lot about is we put out this work that we're really proud of, like pretty advanced sort of economics work. But it's really dense. It's really hard to engage with. And what we've been trying to think about is like, how do we make this useful for practitioners in a variety of fields, whether they're planning out post-secondary programs, whether they're providing career services, whether they're working in employment services. And so I would almost be curious to get your take once this comes out on, and I'm pretty confident in the report and its, sort of applied academic 46-page with 12-page of methods, blah, 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 format will not be the most like practical for you. And so one of my questions would be like, are there other ways we could package this to make some of the insights more valuable for someone in your type of role as you're trying to advise students on, you're looking to head, down this career path? Well, I don't think AI should be the definitive factor in deciding, but it would be better for you to be adequately informed. So maybe we should chat in a month or so.
Is computer engineering part of your program that you advise on? I mean, for web developers and programmers, this is definitely going to be a concern because many of the jobs, the entry-level jobs in that area, is going to be replaced by much smarter, dedicated AI systems that are designed for programming. They're still going to have an army of experts that will have to debug and decode the output of the AI. But the AI will do most of the grunt work. So for a small part of your student population, this will definitely affect their job prospect, because what you will discover is that many of the entry-level jobs are not there anymore for web development and programming. So the mid and higher level positions are still there because they're the one that's basically adjudicating the output, right? So that's going to be a concern. It's like, how do you transition those people? What upskilling do they need, right, in order to get through and pass through that first wave where there are no jobs? And that's definitely a concern. But as far as whether AI in general should be a consideration, no, because at the end of the day, you find jobs based upon your network, the people, the people you know, the people, the job training that you have. The economy that we have right now is still the economy for the next 5-10 years. It's not going to change that quickly, right? So all these things that you're seeing right now, it will change, but it's going to be so gradual. The people that have to worry the most about AI is people like me over 50, right? If I'm not out of a job, right, it's going to be more difficult to get back into it. But people in their 20s, there is a longer runway, right?
We've got your back, Phil. We'll hire you.
Thank you.
I think so. One more question at the back.
Hi. Thank you so much for the sharing your knowledge. I have some questions, especially because I'm an MDM student, a digital media master's student, and my thesis is about AI literacy for creative students. And I want to know, because I'm so deep into all the research that I have been doing. I would like to ask your opinion, if I can add to my thoughts on. So they used to design a curriculum that give AI literacy for creative students, and then they would have critical thinking and the understanding ethics and social impact. Not only the basic tools and how it works, AI in general, but also how to navigate the change and the impact and be aware of the big picture. So it's a lot of critical thinking and somehow collaborate. So they have future proof in after going to the job market. That's always changing. So I'd like to ask your opinion about that. these I saw a lot about some, I don't remember the name, but someone talking about not, it's not the about trend in technology, that not AI is gonna replace anyone's job, but someone that knows more about AI than you is gonna be replacing your job. And this keeps my mind, guys, start making me, and a combination of things that end up to this talk, but noticing different patterns in different places. My son, for example, he's third grade at school, and he asks, "Oh, are you using AI? Like a bad thing?" And I'm, no, it's a good thing. You should be. I want you to learn, right? You know, and I try to use every day, and then talk. Pi is great. Even have a breathe between the pause when you're talking. So many different things to explore. It's concerning sometimes how fear of technology changes impact on people, and in terms of what I have been seeing, especially from MIT, Stanford, and Edinburgh University, they all have the same base that as lifelong learning skills, that you need to be open to learn, excited about learning new things, open to change, and being change always come, like AI is just one more technology. So being open for that is something, as you mentioned before, like being resilient for those changes is a very important skill as well. Yeah, so I have been very much deep on research, but I have all those ideas in mind, but it's good to know from somewhere, like someone in the more expert. Yeah, my background is fashion, and I was a lawyer and then I did career profession, and then I'm in digital media, so I'm kind of new to technology. Yeah, so I kind of curious to explore.
It sounds like you're doing the thing that they're talking about, just adapting. So your question to them is sort of, are your thoughts that you just gave a bunch of thoughts of someone who's deep working in this area.
Any suggestions for my
So
this project? I'm still working on, so good to hear feedback.
So suggestions are and what's your name?
Claudia.
Claudia's some of her thoughts there for someone who's really deep inside their project, and is she thinking about the right things for thinking about creative students and AI literacy? Any thoughts?
Well, I mean, I have two. One would be, there can probably be some really interesting uses for AI. I'm not sure, like, specifically what types of creative pursuits, but the capabilities now in terms of image generation, or like, as all that's advancing. So there's maybe some interesting aspects there. But I think the flip side of it is one of the major sort of unresolved issues in this whole area that particularly affects the creative industries, and probably also like media and journalism, is the way in which they train these large language models through basically just steal. I mean, well, okay, this is what's in dispute, right? They've scraped the internet and everything that's on it and a variety of other sources. Can that be considered fair use, or is this stealing intellectual property? Is there like a copyright infringement issue? And so all that is being sort of actively considered by governments through litigation, but I think obviously with huge ramifications for people in the creative sector. So that might be one aspect to think about. It's not really resolved at this point, but just awareness about those issues around copyright and how it's evolving, I guess.
Philip, any comments?
I guess just one comment that of all the industry, the creative industry is probably going to be the one that's going to be most immediately be affected, simply because they have turned the work that community put out into a commodity. So now you don't have to hire somebody. You simply type in a sentence and you have a bunch of choices to choose from. In the old days, you would have to meet with that person and then do iteratively you work with them over weeks and months to figure out the design that you want and settle on, and they'll come back with different iteration. So it's commoditizing. But to Andre's point, one of the things that we're witnessing right now is basically it's similar to the day before Napster and Apple Music came along, where Napster was basically stealing everybody's music and giving it away to everybody else, right? But eventually Apple came along and figured out how to pay very little, but still pay the artist for their work, right? So eventually that question as to who should benefit from the previous prior work of the artists and the people that these systems have ingested is going to be worked out in the court system, right? One of the sticking point right now is, did they really copy the work? Because they never saved the work. They looked at it, they then transformed the work into numbers. They saved the numbers that made up that work. So in that case, the work now has become transformative, which is fair use, right? They did not save that copy. They did not print out more copy of that thing. So that's where things are, we're going to figure out in the next year or two how the court will view that. Is that transformative, transferring and taking things like pictures and movies and make them into basically a bunch of numbers. And then once you have those numbers, you can use it to recreate a similar image, right? But you now transform it. And under current copyright laws, it looked like that's fair use. But like I said, we'll see. And then it'll be up to our government to come back and says, well, actually the court is wrong. And they'll have to put it in legislation. But that's going to play out in the next 4 or 5 years.
But it's it's a real threat, especially to small creators, right? Because like Sony Music would be like, sure, whatever, we'll just, for a large check, we'll license off our catalog. Whereas there just isn't the market power if you're someone independently producing your own music, or if you're a visual artist whose work has been, well, you don't have the money to litigate, you don't have. So I think there's just this huge power imbalance in the market, and I think that, yeah, so there are a few processes. There's some financial settlements happening, and it's like, in media, I think it was the Financial Times did a big deal with OpenAI, but the New York Times is suing them. So there isn't kind of agreement, and I think in music and the creative industries, we'll see both like litigation and potentially legislation. But I think it's still set unresolved and kind of a key issue over the next few years.
I have this dilemma about that because on the other hand, if you step out a little bit and see the big picture, how much this is part of the changing over, let's say, impressionism came from when they invented the photograph. So they didn't see a point to painting people's pictures anymore because the photograph was already doing that. So they started to think to find opportunities or another way to use their passion about painting in another way that would be capturing the movement. So you saw the dots and this impression, and then creative things comes from the challenge, right? Sometimes I have this law. The lawyer comes back and no, but how it works, the contract, like the intellectual property, and then the owner says, okay, but lives that has changed, and you need to embrace them and find to. The only difference that I see that the advancement of technology and impact on society is much less period of time. Let's say something that changed the impact of 5 years now would be an industrial revolution would be like 50 years. So they've had time to adjust, and now it's they don't have time to do these changes, and then the impact is much more powerful. So sometimes I have those like unique feelings that
Well, I think you just got a little bit of help by your thesis here, some good ideas to add to all the ones you're having. I think we're going to wrap it up now. Thank you all for your great questions and comments and perspectives. And especially thank you to Andre Cote and Philip Mai for their wisdom, their thoughtfulness, their expertise, and their generosity in sharing tonight. Let's give them a big round. Feel free to stay. There's lots of food. Take some home with you if you like. And Andre and Philip might stay around for a couple of minutes if you want to chat with them. That would be great. Thank you all for coming again. Take care.